So when you talk about how indigenous people use some of the plant medicines, and I'm sure cannabis was included in that. Knowing nothing, my perception of that is people using it in sort of rituals and maybe as a rite of passage, perhaps from going from an adolescent to an adult. Is that right? How else are they using it? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, no, you're definitely correct, especially with certain preparations of these psychedelic plants, such as ayahuasca or even ibogaine in Africa, where it is a certain rite of passage into from child into adulthood. You have this kind of journey where you're held by the community, but also it's an understanding that you're embarking on this path alone. And it's typically a multi day kind of ceremonial procedure, even in the way that the plants are harvested, in the way that they're prepared, in the way that things are eaten, and in the songs that are sung and the chants that are made. It's very much a grounding and a holding of space for this rather intense experience, especially for a relatively young person. I think that medicinal plants are also used in just like general kind of healing context for indigenous people. So for example, Maria Sabina, who would hold the mushroom ceremonies, so she is known as kind of mother of medicinal mushrooms. She is from Oaxaca, in a mountain town from Oaxaca, and she would hold these ceremonial rituals that typically lasted all night, where people would consume the mushrooms again in a very ritualistic way. And it was said to have healing applications for the body, emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And we see that kind of across cultures, and even in the indigenous Mexican practice of curanderismo, which is their kind of traditional folk healing. Different medicinal herbs are brought into the Temazcal, which is basically their version of a sweat lodge, and they're just steamed in there, and even they're just beaten on a person. So you don't even necessarily need to consume them for them to still hold quite a bit of reverence and to be absolutely instrumental in these various healing rituals.
Have you partaken in any of these ceremonies?
I have,
Yeah.
yeah. I have specifically partaken in Temazcal. I haven't done an ayahuasca retreat. I think that because of how much I've studied it in an academic setting, it is extraordinarily important for me to have my be very comfortable with my set and setting, and to make sure that I am in a place where I really trust the facilitator of that ceremony, and where I feel like it's not coming from a certain kind of like cultural appropriation.
Mhm.
Whereas I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and there's a lot of opportunity to do ayahuasca rituals and ceremonies in Portland. And while I respect and, appreciate the fact that there's access for people who need it there, for me, I would rather do it in the place where it is from, with a person who has a certain legacy and lineage with this medicine from a DNA perspective. But I did have the opportunity to study with curandero in Oaxaca for about 10 days. And it was an incredible experience where we went through the Temazcal. Him and some other curanderas who were brought in did some limpias, which is their healing practice. And we were taught all about the medicinal plants and the different rituals. And it was quite humbling. And also, we're
And what is, sorry,
so,
Temazcal it's called? That's the plant?
that's the sweat lodge.
Oh, okay. I see. And what
Mhm.
what plant or medicine was consumed during this then?
So there's not necessarily any plant consumed, but that's where the medicinal plants will be brought in and steamed. So
Yeah.
rue is a typical one, and then even wrapped up into bundles, and you dip it into the water that's being steamed, and you beat it on yourself as you're
Oh,
in the
wow.
sweat lodge. And then the limpia is the traditional kind of healing, and that is a holistic kind of combination of mental, emotional, spiritual, physical healing. Copal, which is a tree resin, is often burned. Sometimes medicinal plants are consumed. Sometimes eggs are used, where they'll, rub an egg all over your body and crack it into a bowl of water, in the experience that I had, and read the egg and provide you with some insight from that and see if it resonates there. And so it was an amazing experience to be able to have access to that kind of knowledge,
Uh-huh.
to be granted access to that space, especially as a white person. I really am very sensitive to that fact that as Western culture is just starting to accept kind of psychedelics and psychedelic healing into the mainstream, that Indigenous people have been doing it for centuries and have been, putting their lives and livelihoods on the line to be able to continue to practice this sacred medicine. And so anytime I am granted access to that space by these Indigenous healers, it means a lot.